There are three major issues or traps that I see short-term rental investors run into as they're building their business that absolutely kills their business. In this video, I'm going to explain what those three things are and how you can set up your business to avoid them so that you can have a really successful short-term rental business. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Kirby Atwell, and after my wife and I got to a place of financial freedom about 4.5 years ago through short-term rentals, we started working with others to help them invest in this very specific type of short-term rental that provides really high cash flow, great tax benefits, and then also appreciates long-term. And now we're seeing people's lives literally be changed as a result of these investments. So if you're interested in working with us in this program where we help you find, buy, set up these properties, help you with the right type of financing, all the systems and tools that you need, you can set up a call with me at the link in the description below, and we can talk through your goals and we can talk through the details of the program and see if it's a good fit for you. All right, so diving right into the three things that I see kill short-term rental businesses over and over again that I'd highly recommend avoiding if you plan to build a really successful short-term rental business. And the first one is this common misconception that scale will somehow lead to success. And I see this play out in a couple different ways, but particularly with new investors, I hear them tell me when I ask them, what are your goals with the first one? They say, well, I just want to break even on the first one because eventually, I'll learn some lessons on that and eventually the deals will get better and eventually I'll have this great portfolio. And that's just not how it works. Scaling something that is poor performing doesn't lead to better performance once it's at scale. So if you have 0% cash on cash return, or i.e. no cash flow, you're breaking even on your first deal, scaling that doesn't lead to high cash flow eventually. If you get instead a 20% cash on cash return on your first short-term rental or 30% cash on cash return, and then the next one's 20% and the next one's 20%, and you scale from one property to 20 properties that each have 20% cash on cash return, guess what? Now you have a portfolio that has a 20% cash on cash return. But if you start with 0% cash on cash return, it doesn't eventually, because you have a whole lot of them, turn into this high performing portfolio. You just built a portfolio that really sucks. And that's when people get really frustrated and buy into this narrative that, you can't buy short-term rentals today, that, short-term rentals just don't work and Airbnb is dead and all these things that you read. And it's because you bought the wrong properties. I have calls every single week with people who are interested in working with us in our program to help them buy really high-performing short-term rentals. And a lot of times those people have already purchased properties that they bought based off of intuition. They bought typically in the mainstream vacation rental areas, all the most popular areas that everybody online wants to talk about. And they come to me and they say, can you really buy high-performing short-term rentals, ones that cash flow really well and give you a big tax write-off and appreciate over time? And they don't believe it because they have this property that doesn't perform well at all, that sometimes well-meaning agent sold them. Sometimes it was an agent that was well-meaning to get a commission, sold them in one of these mainstream areas that knew nothing about vacation rentals, but sold them on the idea of vacation rentals. And they don't really care what the performance is like after the person buys it because they got their commission. And so now they're stuck with this property that either is breaking even or worse yet, they're feeding it because it has negative equity on a monthly basis. And if you scale that, you're just scaling yourself into bankruptcy. And so each individual property is super important to have high performing because it all leads up to a portfolio that's either high performing or not. So you need to make sure that you're cash flowing extremely high on each individual property. This is extremely possible right now if you're not buying in the mainstream areas that are highly expensive, typically single family short-term rentals. Obviously the rates are higher right now, so the cost of money is higher. Instead, if you're buying in a little bit more affordable areas, just outside of the more mainstream areas or the cities, and you're buying these small multi-units that typically require less capital, that expensive capital isn't as big of a factor. And because they're multi-units, you have multiple streams of high cash flow or incoming cash coming to you, and your expenses are one relatively low set of fixed expenses. And so that leads to a high net cash flow. And then obviously you get the tax benefit, and then over time it's going to appreciate, especially if you're buying in the path of progress. It might not be the perfect place to buy today, but it's heading in the right direction. And so over time, that's just going to continue to appreciate while your guests pay off that property. So it's really important to focus on every individual deal and not get caught up in this idea that I don't really care if the performance is super high in each deal because long term, I'm going to scale my way way into success. This is not a tech company that burns billions of dollars in hopes that one day we'll just have enough users that it'll become profitable. Every single deal needs to be profitable. Mistake number 2 gets a little bit deep, but it's super important. And that is properly understanding risk tolerance. And I think the reason that this is so difficult to understand or feels so confusing is because so many people are in different phases of their life and different phases of wealth building. Either they've built a bunch of wealth or they haven't yet, or even in different market cycles. And so you'll hear advice for how much risk is acceptable to take on, or different strategies based on different risk factors. And it might make total sense to one group who's in one stage of their life, and it might be terrible advice for somebody else who's in a different stage of their life, or even in different market cycles. And so I think personally, I've thought a lot about this. I think it's super important to focus on playing defense and offense at the same time. So focus on mitigating risk while also building significant wealth. And I think that's extremely possible. But what I see typically is people either focus on one or the other. And so people who focus on offense, these are the type of people who are just focused on wealth building and don't think about the downside or the risk factors that are involved. So when it comes to short-term rentals, these are the types of people who will buy a high-end vacation rental, typically in the mainstream area, that is a $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 short-term rental, typically single-family home in the mainstream area. In a lot of cases, this was a few years ago, people were buying based on these nightly rates and occupancies that were higher then, and now today, they're holding this property that doesn't perform nearly as well. But they bought a property that has no defense. It has no backup option. If they bought an area that's a mainstream popular vacation rental area that was highly performing before or was creating positive cash flow before, and now most people in that area aren't creating much cash flow, now what's the backup option? Now, can you convert that to a long-term rental? There's no way. You're going to hemorrhage thousands of dollars on a monthly basis. Can you sell it when everyone else wants to sell theirs because it's not performing as well? So there's no great backup option in that scenario. And then the other side of the coin is people that just focus on defense, right? And they're so scared to get into the market because they buy into all of the mainstream media narratives around that Airbnb is dead, short-term rentals don't work, and it's impossible to cash flow today. Instead of asking the question, how is it possible? Could I invest a different way to actually buy properties that are super high performing? And so they sit on the sidelines and just wait. And at the same time, they're not building any wealth. So I think it's possible to combine both, to have offense and defense going at the same time. So if you buy a property, again, I typically suggest these small multi-unit properties, typically in lower cost, non-mainstream markets, or just outside of the more mainstream markets, where you can buy a small multi-unit. So that could be a house with an ADU in the back. It could be a house with a finished garage. It could be like where I'm sitting right now, our farm with a barn B&B right behind me that we rent out year round. The more creative, the better in a lot of cases. We just finished a 5-unit that looks like this old Victorian house, but it's 5 units inside that each bring in short-term rental income that cash flow is really, really high. So you can buy a property like that today, based on today's purchase prices, today's interest rates, all the factors today, it cash flows extremely well, and underwrite it in a way that even in a worst case scenario as a short-term rental, it's going to cash flow well. But also, in a black swan scenario, like all of a sudden they pull the rug out from under you and regulations change, or there's a financial meltdown, or there's another COVID lockdown, or whatever the situation is that we know is coming. It's not like if these things are going to happen. We know the next big struggle is coming, or the next big meltdown is coming, or the next big issue is going to hit us to where it's going to change today's environment, whatever that may look like. And so you need to think about what's the worst case scenario then. And so for us, I sleep really well at night knowing that we've built a portfolio of 39 short-term rental listings that all of them still work as long-term rentals. So as a backup option, we could convert them to furnished midterm rentals first if we wanted to. If that doesn't work, we could convert them to furnished long-term rentals and charge a premium above long-term rental rates. And if that doesn't work, they still cash flow. We could sell off all the furnishings, rent them out as long-term rentals, and they still have positive cash flow. So there's no scenario, unless people just don't need to rent places ever again, which I think we're in a very different discussion at that that point, if that's ever the case. But there's no scenario where I lose these properties, where all of a sudden I'm feeding these properties thousands of dollars a month just to keep them afloat. Because we saw that during the pandemic, when all of a sudden there were people who were way over leveraged, all of the bookings dried up overnight, and they had to just feed these properties, and they didn't last very long before they went under. And then a few months later, it was like the heyday of short-term rentals. So had they just been able to hold on, maybe rent them for 6 months as long-term rentals, they could have got back on their feet, rented them as short-term rentals, and made a significant amount of money. So it's super important to think about the offense and the defense. What's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? What's the most common case scenario? And if you're covered on all three of those, then you know that that's going to be a great deal. The third and final mistake that I see a lot of people make that really either kills their business or at a minimum stunts growth is they don't understand how to delegate, or they don't understand how to delegate the right way. And when I was in the military, whether it was at West Point or when I was an officer in the Army, I would have regular evaluation reports. And so I'd sit down with my superior, whoever that was at the time, and it was always very similar. They always said, okay, you're doing very well at your role, but the area you need to improve in is delegation. And I didn't understand the right way to delegate at the time. I see this a lot with people who are very motivated or ambitious, where you'll have a goal or you'll get a task or something like that, where it's something that you see that you need to get something done, and you're willing to put your head down and run through a brick wall to get it done, right, yourself. But you don't understand how to leverage the people around you. And once we understood how to leverage the right way, we saw our business grow exponentially. And so what I see a lot of people do, and what we did in the beginning, is we would delegate or we would hire for specific tasks that we needed done. And so we were always the linchpin in the business when that's the case, because we're hiring people who don't have ownership. We're hiring people who just are there kind of checking a box, doing something. When they're done with that thing, they always would have to come back to us and say, what's the next thing? They didn't get the vision, and they didn't have the responsibility or ownership over different parts of the business. And I think people have this false impression that you need to have a whole bunch of employees, high-level employees, for them to have ownership over a business. And that's not the case. That's not how we're set up. I'm working right now in our barn, and it's like my dream scenario, right? I very consciously did not want to have a physical office space that I needed to show up to early in the morning and stay there while different employees popped their head in and we had all these in-person meetings. I wanted to have a lot of flexibility. I have big goals and I have a decent sized team, but they're all contractor based. They're all in other country, offshore people who are highly skilled at what they do, and they all have ownership over their parts of the business. And the incentives all align. So after we realized that hiring based on tasks didn't make sense, then we started hiring people based on them owning parts of the business, especially so when it comes to short-term rentals and short-term rental operations, we don't do any of the day-to-day. We have 39 short-term rental listings, and we have a ton of flexibility. We spend maybe a few hours a week on our properties, and yet they're self-managed with our internal team, but it's a team of super highly talented offshore personnel, team members that own that part of the business. And so once we hired them and told them that you're going to own this, we're not going to be involved in the day-to-day. Well, there's obviously a train-up period where we'll help you, but they took it and made it even better. And it's incredible when somebody specializes in something, some aspect of your business, and you hire them with the understanding of ownership and the incentives are aligned. The skin in the game is aligned so that they each have a bonus in their particular roles to where they have a base salary that they can depend on, especially if you're hiring offshore, because a lot of them have been burned by these large corporations that promised them, kind of used them, didn't treat them as people, and made a lot of promises that they didn't fulfill. So, you're not going to be able to hire them, most likely high-level talent, just based on bonuses or commission. So we have a base salary that they can live off of, but they have the ability to make pretty nice bonuses. And especially in really low cost of living areas, it doesn't have to be a bonus that's going to kill your business to make a huge difference in their life. And so every area of our business has people who are responsible for it that love running that, or they love doing that thing. They're really good at it, and their incentive is to take it to the next level. Because if it's above and beyond what the expectation is, they know they're going to get compensated. And so they basically treat it as an owner. So our business starts to run as if the owners are involved, several different owners are involved in growing it without us having to be the only one pushing that growth and that improvement on a daily basis. So it makes a huge difference to hire and delegate responsibilities as opposed to delegating tasks. So again, if this resonates with you and you'd like to work with me through the process of identifying the perfect market for your specific goals, the right type of property, the right type of financing, buying the property, setting up all your operations going forward, you can set up a call with me that's at the link that's in the description below, and we can talk personally through your goals, through what you want to accomplish. I can share with you the details of the program, and we can talk about whether it's a good fit. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and hit the like button. Thanks for taking the time to check it out. God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.